They say the screams could be heard for miles. Summer 1462. You're an Ottoman soldier in the most powerful army on earth. You've conquered Constantinople. You've toppled empires. You're marching into a tiny principality called Wallachia to crush a rebel prince. It should take weeks, maybe days. Then you smell it. Death, rot, something else you can't quite name. Your column slows, the scouts have stopped moving, and as you round the hill near the capital city, you see it, a forest. But the trees, they're not trees, they're human beings, 20,000 of them, your brothers, your comrades. Lifted into the air on wooden stakes, arranged in perfect geometric rows, as far as the eye can see. Some have been dead for weeks, their bodies bloated and black. Others are still moving, still breathing, still screaming. Your Sultan, the man who conquered the Byzantine Empire, takes one look and turns his entire army around. What kind of mind creates something like this? And here's the part that should terrify you. This wasn't madness, it was strategy. Cold, calculated, and horrifyingly effective. The story you think you know about Vlad the Impaler? It's a lie. Not because it didn't happen, but because the truth is so much worse. This is the full account of how one man weaponized human suffering so effectively that it changed the course of empires. And by the end, you'll understand why the real horror wasn't what he did to bodies, it was what he did to minds. Let's start with a question nobody asks. What breaks a human being so completely that they become capable of this? The year is 1442. Vlad is 11 years old. His father, Vlad II Dracula, Vlad the Dragon, has just made a deal with the devil. Not a metaphorical one, a real one, with a name, Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire. The deal is simple. Vlad II gets to keep his throne in Wallachia. In exchange, he hands over his two youngest sons as hostages. Insurance living collateral to guarantee his loyalty. So young Vlad and his brother Radu are torn from their home and delivered into the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Not as prisoners in dungeons, but as guests in the palace at Edirne and later Agriguz. They're given fine clothes, education, military training. They're taught Turkish, Arabic, philosophy, and the Quran. On the surface, it looks like privilege. But here's what the history books gloss over. This wasn't education, it was psychological warfare. Vlad spent his formative years, 11 to 17, watching his captors perfect the art of empire building. He studied how the Ottomans used fear as a governing tool. He witnessed public executions designed not just to punish, but to traumatize entire populations into submission. He learned that terror, when applied with surgical precision, was more effective than any army, and he learned something else. He was utterly powerless. While his younger brother Radu adapted, even forming a close friendship with the Sultan's son, Mehmed, Vlad refused to bend. According to Ottoman court records, he was frequently punished for his defiance. Some accounts suggest he was beaten, possibly tortured. The exact details are lost to history, but what's certain is this: something fundamental broke inside him during those years. Or perhaps more accurately, something crystallized. He developed what modern psychologists might call a persecution complex, combined with an obsessive need for control, but he channeled it. Every punishment he endured, he studied. Every torture technique he witnessed, he memorized. He was building a mental arsenal, piece by piece. In 1448, after 6 years of captivity, Vlad finally returned to Wallachia. He was 17 years old. 2 months later, his father was assassinated by rival boyars, the nobility who played both sides between the Ottomans and Hungarians. His older brother, Mircea, was buried alive. Vlad was alone, surrounded by enemies, backed by nobody. And here's where the story gets interesting. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted to remake the world in the image of his trauma. He would take everything the Ottomans had taught him about terror and refine it into something they had never seen before. But first, he had to wait. For 6 more years, Vlad lived in exile, plotting, planning, studying military tactics, and political maneuvering, and in 1456, with Hungarian backing, he finally seized the Wallachian throne. The monster was about to be born. If you're fascinated by the documented psychological breaking points that created history's most notorious figures, hit subscribe. We're just getting started with how this broken boy became something far worse than his captors ever imagined. Vlad's coronation feast in 1456 should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the blueprint for everything that followed. He invited the boyar families, the same nobility who had orchestrated his father's murder and buried his brother alive. Hundreds of them arrived in their finest clothes, believing they were there to pledge loyalty to the new prince. The great hall was decorated. Wine flowed freely. Then in the middle of the feast, Vlad stood up and asked a simple question. "How many princes of Wallachia have you lived through?" The older boyars proudly answered, 7, 10. Some claimed to remember a dozen different rulers. They were bragging about their survival, their political savvy, their ability to outlast any prince who sat on the throne. Vlad smiled. Then he gave an order. Every boyar who had answered was arrested on the spot. But here's where you see the methodical mind at work. He didn't execute them. Not yet. Instead, he separated them into 2 groups based on age and health. The older ones, the architects of his family's destruction, they were impaled immediately outside the palace walls. Not quickly. The stakes were carefully inserted to avoid vital organs, ensuring they would die slowly, over hours or days. Their screams provided the soundtrack for what came next. The younger, stronger boyars and their families were stripped of their noble clothes and force-marched 50 miles north to the ruins of Panari Castle. There, they were given a choice that wasn't really a choice. Rebuild the fortress with their bare hands or die. For months, they hauled stones up the mountainside. They worked until their hands bled, until their fine clothes rotted off their bodies, until they collapsed from exhaustion. Most died during the construction. The survivors? They were never the same. Vlad had effectively erased the old nobility and replaced them with a new class who owed everything to him and lived in absolute terror of his displeasure. This wasn't just revenge. It was a systematic dismantling of the power structure that had made Wallachia weak. And it revealed something crucial about Vlad's psychology. He didn't just want obedience. He wanted to break people so completely that obedience became their only possible response. But this was still domestic politics. The boyars were Wallachian. What Vlad did next would send shockwaves across empires. In 1459, Sultan Mehmed II, yes, the same Mehmed, who had been Vlad's childhood companion, sent envoys to Wallachia, demanding the annual tribute that Vlad's father had agreed to pay. The demand came with an additional insult. Vlad was to present himself personally in Constantinople to renew his oath of vassalage. The envoys arrived expecting the usual political theatre. Perhaps some negotiation, maybe a counteroffer. What they got was a preview of hell. When they entered Vlad's court and refused to remove their turbans, a genuine religious custom in Ottoman protocol, Vlad asked them to explain their tradition. They did, probably relieved that he seemed interested in understanding rather than offended. Vlad nodded thoughtfully. Then he said something that must have frozen their blood. "I respect a man who honors his faith so completely. Let me help you honor it forever." He ordered his guards to nail the turbans directly to their skulls. Think about the precision of that cruelty. He didn't kill them. He mutilated them in a way that was both symbolically loaded and medically calculated to ensure they'd survive the journey back to Constantinople. They were walking messages, their screams echoing across the countryside as they fled back to the Sultan. When Mehmed received his envoys, these men he'd sent in good faith, now permanently disfigured and driven half-mad by pain, he understood immediately. This wasn't the childhood friend he remembered. This was something new, something that had taken the Ottoman lessons in terror and evolved them into something even the Ottomans hadn't imagined. War was now inevitable. But before that war came, Vlad had more messages to send. Here's what most people don't understand about impalement. It wasn't just execution. it was engineering. The common image, a stake driven straight through the torso, would kill almost instantly. That defeats the entire purpose. Vlad's method was far more sophisticated and infinitely more cruel. Based on contemporary medical analyses of the descriptions and surviving Ottoman accounts, here's how it actually worked. First, the victim was laid face down. The stake, carefully selected, rounded at the tip, and thoroughly oiled, was inserted through the rectum. But here's the crucial detail. It was inserted at an angle specifically designed to miss all major organs and blood vessels. The victim was then slowly raised upright, and gravity did the rest. Over the course of hours, or sometimes days, their own body weight would force the stake gradually upward through their torso. The path was calculated to avoid the heart, lungs, and major arteries. In some documented cases, the stake would eventually emerge through the shoulder or chest, but the victim could remain alive for up to 3 days. Why this method? Because Vlad understood something that modern psychological warfare experts now confirm. Witnessing prolonged suffering is exponentially more traumatizing than witnessing quick death. A battlefield beheading is horrific but brief. Impalement was a performance that lasted days, complete with screams that could be heard across entire valleys. But the physical act was only one component. The real genius, if we can use such a perverted word, was in the staging. When Vlad impaled victims, he did it in public squares, along major roads, outside city gates, anywhere that would maximize visibility. He understood that word of mouth and rumor would multiply the psychological impact far beyond the actual number of victims. One impalement witnessed by 100 people would create 100 storytellers, each of whom would tell 100 more. And he refined the symbolism constantly. Stakes were different heights based on rank, peasants near the ground, nobles higher, the highest reserved for enemy commanders. This created a grotesque visual hierarchy that reinforced his message: everyone has a place in my world, and everyone will suffer according to their station. In some accounts, he arranged impaled victims in geometric patterns: circles, stars, concentric rings. This wasn't random sadism, it was a demonstration of control. It said, I have so much power that I can turn human suffering into art. There's a German pamphlet from 1462, admittedly propaganda, but based on eyewitness accounts from Saxon merchants in Wallachia, that describes Vlad dining among the impaled. He allegedly had a table set up in the middle of a field of stakes, ate his meals surrounded by dying men, and seemed to enjoy the experience. Whether this specific incident happened exactly as described is debatable, but what's not debatable is the psychological message: I am so far beyond your understanding of human behavior that your horror doesn't touch me. The Saxons, who had their own complicated relationship with Vlad, circulated these pamphlets widely. They were some of the first mass-produced horror stories in European history, complete with woodcut illustrations. These images, crude but effective, spread across Europe and cemented Vlad's reputation. But here's the question nobody was asking. Was any of this working? Was terror actually an effective military strategy? Or was Vlad just a sadist with power? The answer came in the summer of 1462, and it would prove that Vlad's methods weren't just effective, they were devastatingly so. Sultan Mehmed II had finally had enough. By early 1462, Vlad had not only refused to pay tribute, but had launched raids deep into Ottoman territory south of the Danube. In one particularly brutal campaign, he crossed into Ottoman lands with a small force and, according to his own letter to the Hungarian king, killed over 23,000 people. He even kept a body count, categorizing victims by age and gender. Mehmed, who had conquered Constantinople at age 21, who had crushed rebellion after rebellion, who commanded the most powerful military machine on earth, decided to personally handle the Wallachian problem. In the spring of 1462, he assembled an army estimated between 60,000 and 90,000 men. The exact number is lost to history, but even conservative estimates put it at more than triple Wallachia's entire military-age male population. This wasn't an invasion, it was an extermination. Vlad had maybe 20,000 to 30,000 men total, many of them peasant conscripts with minimal training. A conventional battle would be a massacre. So Vlad did what he'd been planning since childhood. He refused to give them a conventional battle. As the Ottoman army entered Wallachia, they found nothing. Empty villages, poisoned wells, burned fields. Every potential source of food and water had been systematically destroyed. Vlad had ordered his own people to abandon their homes and retreat into the forests and mountains, taking their livestock with them. The Ottoman supply lines stretched longer and longer, and then the night raids began. These weren't typical skirmishes. Vlad had trained specialized units in guerrilla warfare. Small groups of men, maybe 50 to 100, would strike Ottoman camps in the dead of night, killing sentries, setting fires, and disappearing before any organized response could form. They targeted supply wagons, pack animals, ammunition stores. The goal wasn't to defeat the army, it was to make them paranoid, exhausted, and demoralized. But the masterpiece came on the night of June 17th, 1462. Vlad had learned from captured Ottoman soldiers that Sultan Mehmed himself was camped near Targovishte with his personal guard, the elite Janissaries. This was an opportunity that would never come again. Vlad personally led a force of about 10,000 men in what became known as the night attack. Under cover of darkness, they infiltrated the massive Ottoman camp with one objective: kill the Sultan. Contemporary accounts describe absolute chaos. The Wallachians were dressed in captured Ottoman uniforms and knew enough